Is Valentine's Day, which is a popular day for scammers looking to take advantage of people looking for a partner. In 2022, more than $38 million was lost to dating and romance scams across Australia. Joining us now is Ben Young. He's the head of fraud at WESTPAC. Ben, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Take us through what you're seeing in this space. Who is at risk? How much money are people losing at a time to these sort of scams?
Look, unfortunately, romance scams have increased quite a lot in recent years. We saw romance scams rise 26% last year and about 400% over the course of COVID. So they've risen for a couple of reasons. One is because with COVID, it allows people to do non-face-to-face communications more readily, which plays into romance scammers' hands particularly. But also we've seen romance scams morph into different types of sub-variants of the scam, which can be where they can get a lot more money out of victims.
And so what is the sort of modus operandi? What are the red flags that people need to look out for?
Well, we've seen, obviously, for many years, you see romance scammers sort of get you to fall in love with them, usually over many weeks or months. This is not a quick thing. They play the long game for this stuff. But instead of sort of manufacturing some sort of emergency where they need money for some sort of medical crisis or a business crisis, what we've seen them morph into now is where they sort of drop subtly into the conversation about an investment opportunity that they're involved in, that they've made a lot of money on, and that you might be well advised to do the same. And so that's a way where they'll get victims to part with way more money because it's not a gift. You think you're going to get it back with interest. So people will part with huge sums of money in those. We've also seen at the other end of the spectrum, so to speak, other scams where they target younger people and do what we call sextortion, where they will ask people to, instead of sending money, sending illicit photos of themselves, which they will then use to get a bribe out of you to suppress those photos. So that affects younger people, young men particularly, but both of those are sort of variations on the romance scams that we've seen for many years.
Okay, so younger people being targeted for the sextortion. What about who is vulnerable in terms of the traditional type of romance scam? What demographics are being targeted?
Look, they do tend to be a little bit older, not the very older age groups, but sort of in the sort of middle age group. It's slightly more towards women, although not enormously, but both sides are in that sort of slightly older group. Not necessarily because they're not aware. There are some people obviously looking for love in all age groups, but just the older demographics tend to have more money to part with, so they get targeted quite a lot for romance scams.
And where are the offenders coming from? I mean, we sort of assume that it's from overseas, but are there local scammers carrying out similar schemes?
Look, they are mostly offshore. I mean, obviously parts of sort of West Africa famously had history here, but the scammers obviously do their utmost to convince you that they're not, or perhaps sometimes that their version of being offshore is that's the reason why they can't meet face to face. So a lot of the common stories you might have heard about, I'm in the military and I'm on army manoeuvres, or I work on an oil rig, these sorts of stories explain why a face-to-face video camera conversation is not possible. Obviously, in the modern age, these stories have to get more and more convoluted to explain why you can't do video when it is so readily available, which is obviously a huge red flag for people to look out for.
So Ben, how do banks deal with this? If you do lose a significant amount of money, what are your chances of getting it back?
Well, time is everything. I should say banks, when a person logs on to their bank's internet banking and presses to send money, the moment you do that, the bank there are huge numbers of algorithms and processes and people that are involved in reviewing that before the money leaves the door. So, and banks like Westpac, for example, actually do detect most scams, but the sheer number of attacks against customers is growing all the time. So that's why it's important for people to be vigilant. But time is really money. So if you know you've been scammed, call your bank immediately. It should be absolutely your first call. Call the bank and say, I've sent money to somewhere I shouldn't have, offshore or domestically. Even if it has been some time, you might be surprised, but the longer you wait, the lower the chance of recovery is.
That's good advice. Ben Young, really appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
My pleasure.